I never imagined I'd find myself in such a precarious situation, but life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. My name is Victoria, and this is a story about boundaries, temptation, and the weight of decisions. It all started on a crisp Saturday morning. James, my husband's longtime friend and business partner, came over to discuss work. Normally, his visits were routine. Chats over coffee, spreadsheets spread across the table, and an occasional laugh about something mundane. But that morning, there was a different energy in the air, one I couldn't quite place. James had always been charming. He had that effortless way about him, confident but never overbearing, kind but with a playful edge. Over the years, I had grown used to his presence around our home, but I'd never given him much thought beyond his role as my husband's trusted ally. "Victoria, is Ethan around?" James asked, his tone casual as he leaned against the doorway. "No, he just left to pick up a few things," I replied, gesturing for him to come inside. "He shouldn't be long." James stepped in, the familiar scent of his cologne trailing behind him. He set down a briefcase that seemed heavier than usual. "Looks like you've got a lot of work today," I remarked, eyeing the bulging folder peeking out of his case. "You could say that," he said with a wry smile. "But Ethan mentioned you'd been handling some of the logistics for the upcoming event. I thought I'd swing by and get your input." I nodded, feeling a small surge of pride. Ethan often joked about my knack for organization, and it seemed James had taken notice. We sat at the kitchen table, going over vendor lists and seating arrangements. James was attentive, asking thoughtful questions and genuinely valuing my suggestions. I found myself relaxing in his company, the weight of the day's tasks feeling lighter. As we worked, the conversation drifted to more personal topics: favorite vacations, embarrassing childhood stories, and even a debate over who made the best coffee in town. It felt natural, easy, like talking to an old friend. But then something shifted. "Victoria," James said, his voice softer now. "You know, Ethan's lucky to have you. Not just for all this." He gestured at the papers between us. "But for everything you do. It's not every day you meet someone as grounded and supportive as you." I blinked, taken aback. Compliments were one thing, but the way he looked at me then, with an intensity that felt almost personal, left me momentarily speechless. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice steady despite the sudden flutter in my chest. For a moment, we sat in silence. I could feel the tension in the room shift again, heavier this time. James cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "I should probably get going," he said, standing abruptly. "Yes, of course," I said quickly, gathering the papers. "Ethan should be back soon. I'll let him know you stopped by." James nodded, but as he reached for his briefcase, his hand brushed against mine. It was a fleeting touch, accidental and innocent enough, but it lingered in a way that felt anything but. "Victoria," he began, his voice low, almost hesitant. Just then, the sound of the front door opening shattered the moment. "Hey, I'm back." Ethan's voice called out from the hallway. James stepped back, his demeanor returning to its usual easygoing self. "Perfect timing," he said with a grin, grabbing his briefcase. "I'll catch up with you later, Ethan." As James left, I felt a mix of relief and unease. Whatever had just happened, it was subtle, unspoken, but undeniably real. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The days that followed left me restless. I replayed the moment in the kitchen over and over again, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Just a friendly exchange, a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew better. There had been something unspoken between James and me that day. Something neither of us acknowledged, but both clearly felt. Ethan, oblivious to my inner turmoil, carried on as usual. Work, gym, dinner, sleep. His routine was predictable and comforting. But it made the growing unease in my chest all the more isolating. I hated keeping secrets, but how could I explain a moment that technically never happened? Then, as if the universe wanted to test me, James came back. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and Ethan had left for a last-minute meeting out of town. I was folding laundry when I heard the knock on the door. My heart sank. When I opened it, James stood there looking slightly disheveled. His tie was loose, and his usually confident demeanor seemed frayed. "James?" I asked, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk," he said, his tone earnest. "Ethan's not home," I replied, keeping the door partially closed. "I know," he said quickly. "I actually came to see you." That sent alarm bells ringing. My instincts told me to send him away, but curiosity, or perhaps something more complicated, got the better of me. I stepped aside, letting him in. James paced the living room like a caged animal, running a hand through his hair. "Victoria, I owe you an apology," he began, stopping abruptly to face me. "The other day, I crossed a line. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." His admission caught me off guard. On one hand, I was relieved that he acknowledged it. On the other, it forced me to confront the reality I'd been trying to ignore. "It's okay," I said carefully, avoiding his gaze. "Let's just forget about it." "I can't," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Those two words hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. I felt my pulse quicken, the room suddenly too warm. "James, this is dangerous territory," I warned, my voice trembling. "I know," he said, stepping closer. "But I can't pretend I don't feel something for you, Victoria. And I don't think I'm the only one." His words hit me like a freight train. Part of me wanted to deny it, to shut him down and send him packing. But another part, a quieter, more vulnerable part, felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. "James, you're Ethan's best friend," I said, my voice firmer now. "This isn't right. We can't—" "I know," he said again, his expression conflicted. "But that doesn't make these feelings go away." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of his confession, combined with my own unspoken truths, felt suffocating. "You should leave," I finally said, stepping back to put distance between us. James hesitated, as if searching for something in my face. Permission, forgiveness, anything. When he found none, he nodded and turned to go. But just as he reached the door, he stopped. "Victoria," he said, looking back at me. "For what it's worth, I've never felt this way before. Not about anyone." And with that, he was gone. That night, I barely slept. James's words echoed in my mind, clashing with my own guilt and confusion. I loved Ethan. I was certain of that. But James had awakened something in me that I hadn't even realized was dormant. The next morning, I resolved to put it all behind me. I would avoid James, keep my distance, and focus on my marriage. But fate had other plans. The following weekend, Ethan asked me to help organize a charity event he and James were hosting. "You're so much better at these things than I am," he said with a grin, handing me the details. I smiled back, masking the dread bubbling beneath the surface. Saying no would raise questions, and I wasn't ready to explain why I couldn't spend time around his best friend anymore. At the event, everything went smoothly, at least on the surface. James and I exchanged only polite professional pleasantries, careful not to linger too long in each other's presence. But I could feel his eyes on me throughout the night, and I hated how much it affected me. Then, as the evening wound down, James caught me alone by the catering table. "Victoria," he said softly, his tone urgent. "Can we talk?" "This isn't the time or place," I said, keeping my voice low. "When will it ever be?" he countered, his frustration evident. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Ethan appeared, his arm draping casually around my shoulders. "Great job tonight," he said, beaming. "I couldn't have done it without you." James gave a tight smile, his eyes briefly meeting mine before he turned and walked away. And just like that, the moment was over. But the tension between us? That was far from resolved. After the event, life returned to its usual rhythm, or so it seemed. Ethan didn't notice the undercurrent of tension between James and me, but I felt it in every interaction. The stolen glances, the careful avoidance, the way my heart raced whenever his name came up in conversation. I knew I had to find a way to end this, whatever this was, before it spiraled out of control. But as much as I tried to rationalize it, part of me couldn't ignore the magnetic pull I felt toward James. It all came to a head one rainy afternoon. Ethan had gone out for the day, leaving me alone to tackle some overdue paperwork. I was just settling in when my phone buzzed. It was James. "Can we talk? Just for a few minutes, please." I stared at the screen, torn. I knew I should ignore it, but before I could stop myself, I found my fingers typing a response. "Fine, but only for a few minutes." He arrived within 20 minutes, his jacket damp from the rain. He looked more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him, and it caught me off guard. "I'm sorry for showing up like this," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not." "James, what do you expect me to do?" I asked, crossing my arms in a feeble attempt to shield myself. "You're putting me in an impossible position." "I know," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But I can't let this go without telling you how I feel. You deserve to know." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "And then what? What do you expect to happen after that?" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't know. I need you to understand that this isn't some fleeting thing for me. You're not just Ethan's wife to me, Victoria. You're everything." My breath hitched. His words were like a double-edged sword, cutting through my resolve while reminding me of the dangerous ground we were treading. "James, this has to stop," I said, my voice trembling. "I can't do this to Ethan. I can't do this to myself." He stepped closer, his eyes locked on mine. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I just needed you to know how I feel. After this, I'll step back. I promise." But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't tell you. The room was silent except for the soft patter of rain against the windows. I felt a lump rise in my throat, a mix of emotions I couldn't begin to untangle. "James," I said softly, tears welling up in my eyes. "You mean a lot to me, but this isn't right. Whatever we're feeling, it doesn't matter. We have to think about Ethan, about everything we'd be destroying." He nodded, his expression pained but understanding. "You're right. You're absolutely right. And I hate that I've put you in this position." He took a step back, his hands clenched at his sides. "I'll leave you alone, Victoria. I swear. I hope you know how much you mean to me." And then, just like that, he was gone. For days, I replayed our conversation in my mind, feeling equal parts relief and heartbreak. True to his word, James kept his distance. He still worked with Ethan, but our interactions became strictly polite, almost distant. Ethan never suspected a thing. His trust in both James and me remained unshaken, and I made it my mission to ensure it stayed that way. I threw myself into my marriage, determined to make things right. But sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet and Ethan was fast asleep beside me, I'd think about James. Not in a longing way, but with a quiet sadness for what might have been, in another life, under different circumstances. In the end, it was a story of restraint, of choosing loyalty over fleeting emotions, of protecting what mattered most. And though it wasn't easy, I knew in my heart it was the right choice. Some lines, no matter how tempting, are simply not meant to be crossed.